our speaker today, Mr. Chuck Reutlinger, my colleague over in Career Services. He's Associate Director. I call him our resident information junkie. So besides being resource savvy, Chuck's also worked in recruiting for a number of years. He has degrees in both history and library science. Great to have him to turn to in Career Services. One of his specialty areas that we do turn to him for is negotiating. So that's why we have a meeting this workshop tonight. He'll be sharing more about that process with you, and I welcome you to ask questions. The more interactive, the better. He does have a presentation, but I know he also likes answering students' questions as well. Welcome you to do that. In addition, on your way out, if you don't have one of our new 2013-2014 career guides, they're over on the piano. Plus the rest of the Just for Masters series flyers if you want to take one and put it up on your fridge or in your bathroom mirror or something. So I welcome you to take those as well. So thank you for coming. Without further ado, Dr. Reutlinger.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's wide-eyed and we managed to turn on some air and cool this room. When we came in, it was like an oven. And I thought, well, if I talk in that, you'll all be asleep, and I hope it won't be because of me. But we tried to cool it off. It is my pleasure to do this. Let me do some preliminary things before we jump into the presentation. I am interested in who is here, because I wasn't at the sign-in, and so I'm just kind of curious what schools are represented here. So I'm going to run through, and if you are from that, I'd love to know that you're here. Now, I know we have someone from ESF, and more than one, okay. How about Elsie Smith, Engineering, Computer Science? Okay, we have some people from there. How about the I School? Some people from the I School. How about the Whitman School? Anybody here from the Whitman School? Good. How about the Maxwell School? From there, good. Anybody from Visual and Performing Arts? Anybody from the Falk College? This is going to be a good. Anybody from Education? Some people there, okay. Let's see, what have I missed? Architecture? I always forget architecture. We don't have anybody. So, arts and sciences, of course. Okay, so we've got a good mix of people. And so I'm going to assume that across this, there may be a variety of career aspirations and targets, things you're trying to do. And so for that reason, what I'm going to do today is as this suggests. This is an introduction. As you will see from the program, there's a variety of things that you can do on your own after today to really engage yourself with this element, the whole idea of negotiating. And embedded in this are a number of links, some of which I will open up today. We're scheduled to have about an hour and 45 together. It's going to be my purpose to get through the slides, but I don't want to rush through them. But I'm going to try to deal with them in a certain sequence, which I'll introduce to you in a second here. The other thing that I'm curious about is, of course, what you came to learn. It's a beautiful day outside. You could be sitting in the grass somewhere, but you decided to come to this program. So would you be comfortable sharing with me what you came to learn? Anyone want to start? Okay.
Sources where we could look at for base salaries, for example.
Okay.
And then things to think about, like what benefits to ask about.
Okay, so her comment is resources perhaps to research salaries so that you might go into the market, as we say it, with eyes open and well informed. And also the whole idea of negotiating might include things other than salary. And so she also mentioned things like benefits and other kinds of things. We'll certainly cover both of those. Who else had a hand up? Yes?
How and when to bring it up during the interview process?
How and when. Good. You've almost named one of my slides. Thank you. Who else? Yes?
Mine's related to that. I would like to know when it is appropriate, and this may vary depending on what career you're going into, okay, but when it is appropriate to be like, well, that's not enough. But if you upped it by like this, then it
X.
would- you know what I mean, like that.
Sure, how do you-
And do you make that, is it like a bartering thing? Do you make that higher so they can come down, or do you actually tell them the real thing?
Yeah, good, thank you. The gist of it, when do you do this and when is it appropriate and how do you really do it? If you think for some reason that you deserve something different than what you've been offered, I'm going to keep it that vague, how and when do you do that? And what will be the possible ramifications, if there are any? Okay, who else had their hand up? Yes.
I guess how to know when to negotiate, because I think I deserve a lot more than I'm being paid like all the time. But I wouldn't want like realistically, when's a good time?
Mhm.
What should I expect?
Okay. That prompts me to say that when you take the whole topic of negotiation, and certainly some of the resources I'm going to suggest, do address kind of mid-career negotiating. I need a raise kind of thing. It's not my intention to go into that specifically, but some of the resources that I've highlighted and you'll be able to see will deal with that. But most of my focus is, you're out for a new job, whether it's an entry-level job or something else. How and when, that sort of thing. Anyone else? Did I miss? Have I hand up? Yes.
I mean, this goes along with like everything that everyone's saying, but kind of contrary to what she was saying, like I don't have a lot, virtually any work experience, so going out and I feel like the first offer I get, which is like real money, I'm gonna be like, yes. But and maybe they realize that, so they're, might lowball it, but I don't even know where to begin, and I don't want to be rude because anything is gonna sound good, I feel.
Thank you for that. Because one of the things that I'm going to bring up fairly early on is an article that talks about myths in terms of negotiating. And one of them is that one, and phrased a little differently. But we'll actually open that one up and look at them so we can try to address the fears and insecurities that come with your own assessment of your strengths and liabilities. Anyone else? Oh.
In addition to what's already been brought up, a lot of positions I'm looking for don't list even a range of salary, and I would like to understand, is it comparable to what I'm currently making?
Sure.
And to be honest, I'd like to call them up and just discuss it so I don't waste their time or mine.
Good luck.
You would think that it'd be listed there. Because I hate to get all the way through the entire interviewing process, multiple steps, and realize this isn't in the ballpark.
Yeah, so some of his issues, as you might have heard, are when can I get some definitive information so that I know I'm not wasting my time or theirs? How can I evaluate what I think may be an offer or what might come down the pipe versus what I might be earning now? Again, in a situation where you are currently employed versus just starting out. So, yeah, we'll certainly touch on some of those things. Thank you.
I was going to get into it. As an international student, one of my main concerns is actually knowing what is on the table to negotiate. Obviously a salary, but I know that here in the States, it's not just a salary, it's benefits. And what are those benefits and what things must I look out for within those? Because I really don't have much understanding of what is actually on the table.
Right. Thank you. That's another slide that I have.
Okay.
I seem like I've anticipated some of your needs here, so I'm heartened by that. Yes.
Tying into the gentleman's question up front, I'm a non-traditional student, probably older than many of the students here, but I have tons of experience. And now that I am almost finished with this degree, how do I negotiate with when no range is given and they post salary commensurate with experience?
Yeah, how to interpret that, at least from your point of view, and then how to figure out how they interpret it.
Correct.
That's a great point, and that may be your situation today, and it certainly will be your situation in the future, perhaps. Any other things? Yes.
Well, I was asked in an interview, do I prefer salary or commission? And, why?
Yeah, that's going to be particular. She said, I was asked in an interview, did I prefer a salary-based compensation or would I entertain something on commission? Obviously, that does get into what kind of modes of pay do people entertain. Sales jobs are usually the ones that are commission-oriented because you're paid for performance. But there may be also things that relate to incentives. You know, it's like a ball player winning 20 games in baseball. They get a little extra in the paycheck if they achieve performance goals, that sort of thing. So that's a legitimate concern. It may only affect certain kinds of work, but you know, if you happen to be interviewing for something like that, one would hope you might know ahead of time typical modes of pay. But it is an employer's way to kind of measure whether you're receptive. If they have a commission-based thing and you kind of, and they ask you that and you kind of go, well, you know, boom, body language, you're probably not that comfortable. But anyway.
Well, I told them salary.
Yeah. Well, again, you've got to know what your needs are and what your freedoms are and that sort of thing. The other thing I'm curious to know is if any of you have already engaged in negotiating as related to a career situation. Has anyone ever done that? Yes? Do you mind sharing the circumstances?
I was actually on the other end,
Ah, that was my next question.
so
Okay.
I was the hiring manager.
Yes.
I was trying to get better pay and better hours because they had me working like weekend nights, and I kept asking about it,
Yeah.
and eventually I got better pay, but I didn't get a better schedule.
I see. So you've tried it.
Yeah.
Okay. How about negotiating in general? Who can say outside of an employment kind of situation that they've engaged in negotiating? Yeah? What circumstances?
I used to sell things at swap meets.
Ah,
That's-
perfect.
That's why I asked about the bargaining question. It is a type of negotiating. It's a little different than.
Yeah. Yeah, if we're not talking about employment-related situations, usually we're talking about buying and selling type situations. And one of the things that will come up, and is dealt with somewhat in terms of myths, is if an employer makes you an offer, is that hard and fast and non-negotiable? Or is there room for negotiation, and are they inclined to do that, and that sort of thing? I always think of it, again, in a buying-selling situation. Are some of you international students? Okay, so I'm going to wonder, in your home cultures, to what extent is it common practice, for instance, to go into a store or into a market and haggle, what we in the U.S. call haggle? I don't want to pay that, I'll give you this. Anybody do that? You may have heard of that sort of thing, but it may not be common experience. I always think about my particular frame of reference. One of the things my wife and I like to do is to go out and on the weekends, and people around here have what they call estate sales or house sales. Somebody dies, good example, last week. Somebody had died, the family doesn't need their household, and so they kind of put it all up for sale and that sort of thing. And they price it, but it's a question of what will they take for it, kind of thing. So in a way, an employer prices a job, you know, and then it's your challenge to figure out what's the real importance to them, and whether the price they set on the job is one that you can accommodate. And also, since you're all the sellers in this, let's not forget, you're all the sellers, not the buyers. You know, what price do you pay? Do you price on yourself? And that's where we start to get into, you know, doing salary research and what are the prevailing rates and that sort of thing. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. It gives me a better sense of who's here and what kinds of issues we're dealing with. All right, so what we're going to do first is tell you a little bit about what we're going to try and do here. Negotiate, you know, the what, when, and why of it all. So we'll take that up a little bit. And it's at that stage that I'm going to open up another resource which kind of deals with myths. Because there are a lot of myths out there, and we'll try and highlight some of them. What might be negotiable? And I say might be because it may depend on your level of entry. It's not uncommon to think that people who are engaging in their first employment may have little bargaining power people a little further into careers who have specific experiences and et cetera, more features of the product, if you will. They may have more latitude in negotiating. But what might be negotiable? If you engage in it, a lot of your success will hinge on how prepared you are to do so. And so we'll talk about what you should be preparing and that sort of thing. Eventually, we'll get around to the actual action. If you think a situation bears conversation, how do you actually initiate that? And when, and that sort of thing. And then we'll have some background stuff. But that's basically what we're going to do. I will make this remark too. In this, so far as we have a number of international students here, my remarks and my foundations are pretty much based in the American experience. And so if you're going to go back to your home country, I would leave it to you to draw on networks and knowledge of prevailing practices in your home countries, because there may be very little presence or precedent for negotiating, whereas in this country, frankly, there is a great precedent for negotiating. One of the things you might be interested to hear, a few years ago, there's a research institute at Michigan State University that looks at the college job market, emerging students and the employers that might employ them. And they asked the two groups, they asked employers and then they asked emerging students, are you inclined to negotiate? And out of the group of students, only 1 in 10 said they were inclined to negotiate. Out of the employer group, better than 4 out of 10 said they were inclined to negotiate. So if one of the myths is employers don't want to hear it, that may not necessarily be so, and some of the folks here had some experience with that. It bears that out. But this is what we're going to try and cover. So, with that said, all right, what is negotiating? It's simply an exchange of information. It's a conversation. It's not a fight. It's not an argument. It's simply a conversation, which, yeah, from your point of view might be, how can I get the best for me? But don't lose sight that this is an arrangement. This is a relationship building experience. In accepting an offer and pursuing, you're making a kind of unspoken promise to deliver on whatever is offered. Don't lose track of that. And so it's important that whatever you discuss be seen in a mutually beneficial kind of way. How will the employer benefit? I mean, this is the bottom line. Finding a job, you're the seller, they're the buyer. How will they benefit from your product? That sort of thing. And you are a product with multiple features. You have education, you have experience, you have talents, you have skills, you have personality traits that differ from one another among you. So you're really kind of like a product. And so your task throughout this is to get them to agree to buy your product and then to figure out the conditions of employment. So at its most really simplest, this is what negotiation is. The question about when, once a job offer has been made and considered, this probably means, well, I can tell you, the reason I underlined it is to dissuade you from engaging some conversation about negotiating too soon. So let's use an example, let's suppose you go through a multi-interview process, and that's not unusual. And toward the end of the interview process, they're beginning to really evaluate their finalists and really decide who they're going to make an offer to. And so, I mean, I've heard of circumstances where you go in for multiple interviews on a day, and while you're interviewing with somebody later in the day, the other people are in a room somewhere going, we got to get this person. We got to get him. Let's get him now. Because employers are battling for talent. They want, if you're really good and they can see benefit, they want you off the market. They don't want anybody else stealing you away from them. And so it's not unprecedented that they might make you an offer at the end of the day. Make you an offer. Wouldn't that be great? And so what you have to guard against is the emotional response of it all. Because you could be thrilled. I mean, they make you an offer and you have this burst of you know, thrilled kind of thing. You have to kind of temper that. And so you should probably, if that happens to you, and I hope it happens to everybody in this room, you'll want to say, wow, I'm really pleasantly surprised. This is great. I have a really good feeling for this. I really want to give this serious consideration. I want to give this serious consideration. So that means give me some time to think about it, because the emotional response of getting a job offer needs to be tempered with the rational evaluation of what it is. And indeed, on more reflection, you may have some questions, or of course, you may have some things that you might want to negotiate if they can be negotiated. So with that said, let me open up this article on myths, and we'll kind of go through them. They're really quick, and you'll be able to read this in more detail. Oh, I didn't say that. We're going to send this out through our OrangeLink system because we've captured everybody that's here, and we can easily send you this whole program. So you'll be able to follow up on that. So let's go down here. Open this. So here's an interesting collection of articles, actually, from a resource called Quintessential Careers. And we really think this is a great source, but here's basically some of the myths. Now, I'm sure you all can't read this, so I'm going to read it for you. Myth number 1, negotiating salary or other parts of a job offer is frowned upon. Well, it might be frowned upon some places, but it isn't necessarily frowned about here. I've already cited that survey, and also as long as, it says, as long as you respect and understand the process and don't ask for unattainable or unrealistic things, it may work out. They may be amenable. It is in this gentleman's question and some of the rest of you, salary research and stuff, that's where you start to get an idea of what is attainable and realistic. I once did a simulated interview with a student, and I said, in the context of the role play, I said to her, well, what kind of salary are you looking for? And this could happen to you in the very first interview. I see someone nodding, and apparently it has. And she was totally taken off guard. But she tried to recover, and she said, well, I've just spent almost $100 and some thousand on my college education. I'd certainly like to make that back. Well, how about $50,000? I knew her field, and I knew what the entry-level salaries were in her field. She was nowhere near it. So had she done, as part of her basic exploration, research into numbers, she wouldn't have made that mistake. And I wouldn't have concluded, wow, does she ever have an inflated sense of her own value? Because that could turn me off. But nonetheless, it may be receptive as long as you don't have unrealistic things. Yes, will there be employers who refuse to negotiate things? This note says, yes, some will, and some will actually tell you so. I think the number who tell you so are small. However, there are other ways you might try to determine whether a certain employer is amenable. So, next myth. This one gets to this young lady's question back here. Accepting the first offer is the safest strategy for job seekers. Because maybe if you don't take it, that person has other job seekers, the number 2 choice, the number 3 choice, and they'll just say, well, okay, I'll just offer it to him or her, kind of thing. Well, that's not necessarily true. So if you are inclined to accept the first job, because whatever insecurities or whatever perceptions, your own assessment of strengths and weaknesses, you may not want to do that. because that's not the way employers usually do things. If they arrive at someone to whom they want to make an offer, they're very sincere, and they want you aboard. They don't just make an offer lightly. They really do want you aboard. And so I don't know that you necessarily have to say yes on the spot and risk being under-rewarded. There are articles that actually spell out if you start here and someone else starts here and everybody gets an equal percentage-wise raise, in a little while, it really gets to make a difference. But you should probably consider it. So that's their point in this one. Note, be wary of employers who try to rush you into accepting an offer or want a decision on the spot. It says, even if you don't have anything else in the pipeline, resist. Resist. Now, here's an interesting scenario that happened to me a couple of years ago. I mentioned earlier that an employer, if they like you, they want you off the market. I had a young student, engineering student, undergrad, but that doesn't change the example, he was in his senior year, starting into his senior year, aerospace engineering, I think. He had somehow gotten himself a job with one of the big aerospace contractors, Lockheed Martin. They have a facility here in Syracuse, but he worked in Florida. He apparently had done a really good job, and by the time the internship ended in August, they made him an offer, which was great. That's not an uncommon practice of employers. However, the uncommon part of it was, and that's why he came to see me, was they wanted an answer by September 20th. Now, most of you probably realize that that's slightly ahead of most organizations' recruiting cycles. And so they wanted him off the market. They didn't want anybody else to learn about it. And he found that was really undue pressure. And so we talked about how to handle that situation. And we'll talk about that perhaps being one of the things that's negotiable, which is more time to think and maybe more time to play the market. So be wary of that. You should always request some time to consider an offer. This one, salaryman. Negotiating salary in a weak economy is a bad idea. I don't know what your perceptions of the current economy are. Since 2008, which was really a trough of activity, we've made incremental improvements. They haven't been what a lot of people would wish they would be. We've seen, I mean, the market is high right now if you gauge health of the economy by Wall Street, but we all know, or maybe you know, that job creation hasn't exactly been booming. And so you may perceive this still to be a challenging market, and you may wonder, gee, in a challenging market, should I risk negotiating? The point they make here is that's not true. You should entertain negotiating because companies really go to great lengths now to determine who they want to attract and who they want to offer and that sort of thing. Now, there may be less jobs out there, but when you're in a process that leads to an offer, that's something you want to take into consideration. So their point in terms is don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. Salaryman, believing that everything is negotiable could be something that works against you. And I referred earlier to the idea that maybe some things will be negotiable, and those people with more experience and all may have more leverage in doing so. And if you're just emerging from college into a first job or something, you may feel you have less to negotiate. But in some ways, that may be true, but it remains to be found in any one situation. So let's see if there are any others here. This is really important. This one says, asking for an offer in writing will offend the employer. Well, if employers made a practice of this routinely, this wouldn't be an issue. They may not, but you should never consider an offer until you have it in writing. Now, in writing, obviously, if they're going to email you something, that constitutes in writing. Something that you can evaluate, something that allows you to say, is this what I thought it would be? Because remember, up to this point, if you're doing what you should do, you've had a conversation about the job. You should be asking questions, and so you should understand their expectations and the responsibility, thoroughly. But nonetheless, you want to get something in writing. At the end of the process, if you should negotiate something different, you should feel comfortable asking for those revisions in writing so that you can then reconsider what essentially is an amended offer. So those are some of the myths that attach to the whole adventure and people's natural sense of negotiating. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, so we'll take that down and move it back to our program. And here we go. So what might be negotiable? Well, usually we think of things related to money. And so that might be initial salary, that might be mode of pay. Now, she raised the issue that in some fields, sales being one of them, obviously, some people are paid on the basis of their sheer performance. And so if you make a lot of sales, you make a lot of money. If you don't, you don't, kind of thing. Bonuses might be, or incentives, kind of thing. Sometimes incentives are individualized. Sometimes they're group-oriented, and this is based on a group's performance. You might get something. We always hear about, Wall Street bankers getting bonuses of millions of dollars. That's performance. Whatever they were set out to do, they achieved it, and maybe then some. That sort of thing. The other bonus idea comes in is what are called signing bonuses. This is money that an employer might give you up front once to induce you to accept their offer. Again, remember, you get to the end, you're a finalist, they want to make you an offer. They may what we call sweeten the deal. And so they might say, well, we'd like to offer you this position at this salary, but we'd also like to offer you X thousands of dollars as a signing bonus that you can use for whatever you like. You go, wow. All right, it isn't in your paycheck every year, but it's that initial signing bonus. It used to be a fairly common practice when the employment market was stronger, back in almost 20 years ago by now. Certainly back when the dot-com boom, the late 90s, employers were snapping up talent like crazy, just so they could have it in-house and nobody else could have it. And they were using salary or bonus offers to get people to sign up, so to speak. It doesn't happen as much anymore, but as companies go and determining how they evaluate talent, that might happen. Other costs that might come out of your pocket. These are basically things that could come out of your pocket. Relocation. Now, if you're a typical college student who doesn't have many real worldly goods to his or her, relocation is not a big deal, but who knows? They might pay for you to rent a U-Haul and drive from Syracuse to New York or something. That might happen. The more experienced you are, the more higher the position you occupy, that might be one of their more common benefits, is relocation. But it's one of those things where they may not volunteer that they can cover that. And so as you start to think about it, and after today start to get it in your own head, what kinds of things might be possible, that might be something at an appropriate stage of the interaction you decide to question.
Question.
Yes?
I have a question about relocation costs. Is that just going to, like at the start of their job? How about when they, for example, unfortunately fire you? Will they also pay for relocation to bring you back to where they
That's interesting.
Yes.
The question is, yes, it's not uncommon for them to help you move to where you're going to start, but what if the circumstances change and they have to let you go? Will they include anything in what's come to be known as a separation package that might afford you the chance to relocate if that's what your circumstances dictate? Maybe. Maybe.
It's not a common practice.
Yeah, not usually. Well, it depends. If they take a college grad who's been employed for 2 years, probably not. They might not have a separation package the way a mid-manager or an executive would be. They would probably kind of buy them out, and so they might be more. The second one, accommodation of disabilities. If you or anyone you know has a disability which might need to be considered in employment, particularly if accommodation is necessary for you. Let's suppose you have a vision deficiency, and you might need a different screen reader, or you might need something that helps you do the work you're capable of doing, because they don't make offers to unqualified people. You might have to bridge that with them. Now, there's the possibility, I suppose, that a disability might need to be spoken about even in the process of getting to an offer. Obviously, individuals who have mobility impairments, we tend to think of people in wheelchairs, hey, they may need to be able to access a building to even have an interview. And so that brings up the whole idea of disclosure and all at the outset. But this may be one of the things that you or someone you know is affected by, and I certainly would encourage you to share these resources with them. The link over there is to an organization that's called the Job Accommodation Network. Jan actually has a database of searchable accommodations. So they go through all kinds of physical, sensory, other kinds of disabilities, and they will actually suggest what accommodations might be made such that you can be productive in a job setting. These are specific to the United States because we have legislation that encourages employers to disregard or accommodate people with disabilities. There's great talent among that population. It's a huge population in our country, but unfortunately the employment numbers for people with disabilities are really poor. And I think some of it is the employers think the worst of somebody with a disability, and that needs to be corrected. And unfortunately, sometimes the candidate needs to take the lead on that. So again, I offer this as something that if it affects you, you need to take that into account. If it does, or you know someone who might be affected by this, please refer them to me, because among the other things that I do for our office is I'm kind of a liaison with a community of people with disabilities. I belong to a national organization that helps me know more. So enough said, if that affects you. Working conditions. And so resources. By resources I mean, well, here's an example. You know, the world seems to be moving such that everybody assumes that everybody has and uses a smartphone. Okay? Does your work necessitate that you have such a tool? If it does, who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be your phone? Is it going to be the company's phone? Are they going to cover your plan? Are they going to somehow manipulate what they pay for and what they don't, etc.? That's a good example. All kinds of technology resources that you might need to do your work. That constitutes resources, that sort of thing. When you're going to start working, that might be a negotiable. It depends on the company or the situation, but you know, if there isn't a real urgency, and you don't need to be in a training class, for instance, on a given date with everybody else that gets hired, that could be a negotiable. Hours, flex time. You know, this is something you want to be asking about. You know, what do people tend to put in terms of hours on the job? You don't want to be surprised if the job calls for you to be at work 70 or 80 hours a week versus what's traditionally, you know, the work week, 40 hours. Flex time. Can you come in at 6 and go home at 3? Can you come in at noon and go home at 11? You know, these kinds of arrangements. As long as you can get your work done, that may be fine. That's flex time. Similarly, location or telecommuting, meaning working from home or working remotely. That's come into more favor over the last decade. Arguments for it are it's cheaper for employers, that kind of thing. Arguments against it are that the employers are concerned with productivity issues. You know, for all the employer knows, you know, you're sitting at home watching the Today Show when you're supposed to be working or something. Now, some organizations, some telecommuting kinds of jobs, like call center stuff, you know, if you take a call and you're going to support somebody, you can do it from your living room, but they probably hook you up to some way to monitor you so that they know how many calls you're taking and how long you're staying, you know, those kinds of things. The incoming president of Yahoo, I believe, not so long ago, issued a kind of corporate directive that they were going to discontinue telecommunication. And that's kind of sent a chill through employers, and they began to re-examine whether telecommuting was really working for them. And so that might be something that you'll find out about. And that would be an honest question for you to ask in an interviewing process. What kinds of modes of work do you entertain? Perfectly, you just want to be informed. Vacation probably isn't anything that a new graduate is going to negotiate. But it might be something, if you're more experienced and thereby can command more, you might think about. I include parking or travel. I mean, if you're living in a large city where you don't own a car and don't have to grapple with parking costs, you're going to travel by subway, for instance, in New York or Boston or DC. You know, will they help you with the monthly MTA card or something? You know, those kinds of expenses. So stuff that would either come out of your pocket or influences how you work and where you work and that sort of thing. That may be negotiable. Benefits, the idea of all kinds of things. In one of the links that I'll open up, there's a discussion of what kind of benefits are out there, and at least a beginning discussion. I'm no expert on benefits, and so, but there are people who are, and that would be one of the things to learn about, but it might be somewhat negotiable. The idea of what they call cafeteria plans. If you don't know what a cafeteria is, and our international students might not, this is the kind of thing like Shine Dining, where you come in and you pick up a tray and you walk down the line and you say, oh, some of that, but not that, kind of thing. Self-service, you get what you want. Well, when it comes to benefits, you know, if you don't need health insurance, well, maybe that's something that you don't need to help support. Now, sometimes employers ask employees to shoulder that burden. That's the biggest cost to employers nowadays, health costs. But if you don't need it, but you might. My daughter, for instance, when she left college, she has allergies. And so she has to take a medication for that, and help someone cover those prescription costs would be real nice. Because otherwise that comes out of her pocket, and that can get pretty stiff. So things like that might be benefits oriented, education assistance. Again, this is one of the things that you should be asking about throughout an interviewing process. What kind of ways do you support people to advance their careers? If somebody says to you in an interview, are you considering more education? That's a bit of a tricky question, but they might be, you know, your answer until you know what they encourage might be, well, I'm interested in any kind of activity that will forward my career. What kinds of things do you encourage your employees to do? Because it could be more degree work, it could be certification work, it could be all kinds of things. It could be attendance at professional meetings, whatever your field might be. So there's all kinds of ways that you can better yourself, and of course, if you're bettering yourself, presumably they're benefiting. And so it's a legitimate thing to ask about. Professional expenses. Maybe you'd like to maintain a membership in an association. Maybe you'd like to go to a conference. Maybe you know, these kinds of things. It depends on what your particular field may turn out to be. But it would be nice for them to assist you with that, if not pick up those expenses too. So benefits, things that accrue to you to help you do your job better, to help you motivate. I mean, benefits plans are help, you know, they want you to be happy. You know, if you have to worry about, oh, here was one that's in the news right now. Employers who have offered health benefits to spouses. I have a great deal here at the university. I'm covered, my wife is covered, while my kids were in college, they were covered. Wow, that, properly had me incented to keep working hard, kind of thing. Minute they take that out of the mix, I start to think, well, they don't really care about me anymore, kind of thing. And so if that trend continues in the interest of reducing health costs, that could influence whether you go with company A or company B. So little things like that. Performance review is one of the things that you might negotiate. By performance review, maybe you're unfamiliar with this term. This is how do you find out how you're doing? And so it's my experience that in interviewing, I seldom have people who, for instance, in a simulation of an interview, I've never seen it, frankly, in a real interview that I've conducted. Somebody who says, how will I know I'm doing a good job? Is there a performance appraisal system? Have any of you who are a little more experienced had a definitive performance appraisal system? He's nodding yes. What was it? Yearly or?
It was yearly.
Yeah,
There was one after 6 months, like when we were first hired, there was one at the 6-month mark for an employee, and then there was a yearly cycle for the whole company.
Yeah, everybody hear that? Not uncommon to have an early review and then after that an annual review. Yes?
Yeah, pertaining to that, for example, after 6 months, if there is a 6 months review, will that also automatically mean a salary raise?
Good, because you read my mind.
Should that be in the contract from the very beginning?
Well, it certainly should be in your understanding. So it's not it's fairly uncommon that people ask about this, but you could certainly do this innocently enough in an interviewing process and learn not only do they have a formal system of performance appraisal, but of course, what are the ramifications of a strong review? Does it mean more money at that point? Does it mean different responsibilities? I mean, what does it mean if you get such a thing? What does it mean if you don't? I mean, it's a question that you might ask if you have, not too much insecurity about your own performance potential. But that whole issue of performance, because in some instances, an employer may not alter an initial salary figure. But if they decide not to, and you approach it, but you don't get an adjustment, that doesn't mean you're going to turn down the offer. But you might wonder, would they consider a review sooner than their scheduled review, such that, this is where it really comes down to, are you going to deliver, such that they might entertain that. And so if you don't want to start at X, but you kind of have to, your question becomes, how long do I have to stay at X? Well, in some circumstances, it would be a year, for instance. Can you influence that to come about earlier? So that's, you won't have to sacrifice if that means a sacrifice for you, that sort of thing. So performance review timetable, all these things might be on the table and you might be able to bridge them. Yes?
Along those lines, what I've heard also is that sometimes you'd be offered a temporary position to evaluate performance and then you get not given an offer.
Right.
As an international student, that worries me because I have visa issues.
Yeah.
So that's another of the big questions that I had relating to this topic as to when is that on the table or is it not, or what is common practice, especially in regards with international students in this topic.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm sorry I haven't included it here. I will for the next time I do this. It is certainly a topic that you could bridge in an interviewing process before you're made an offer. You could an employer, at least in the United States, if they comply with the law, they have to ascertain that you're eligible. But that doesn't mean they need to ascertain it before you make an offer. Actually, they only need to ascertain it after you accept an offer. But they may, of course, ask you, are you eligible to work in the United States on a permanent basis? And the key phrase being, on a permanent basis. Because you may not be. And you can't necessarily assume that the employer has any experience at all working with international students and the provisions by which you can work and the length of time where you might work, that sort of thing. So you really need to be an expert in that. Now, I know our Slutzker Center here does workshops on eligibility, visa type stuff, and I certainly would defer to them as our campus experts. But that is difficult if you're faced with what sounds like a temporary position or a project-based kind of contract position. All kinds of things could be there. There's no easy answer to that. You're basically looking for, you're assuming you're going to perform up to their standards. You'd better know what their standards are, and that's fair game for an interview. But it still may be a delicate situation. If that concerns you, this is why I said at the outset, I'm only scratching the surface of this topic, and those are the very kinds of things that we would invite you to come in and talk individually with us about. Because I'm hoping you can take advantage of these resources and bring yourself up to a higher level of understanding, but you're still going to face individual situations which may dictate some conversation. And that's certainly fair game with us. Okay, now there's two collections of articles that I would encourage you to look at, and we'll just take a quick gander at those. Again, from Quintessential Careers, they have all kinds of stuff. They have a job offer quiz, something to help you do something. Templates for accepting a job, that's nice. Personal salary reports, negotiation, frequently asked questions. Achieve the offer you deserve by avoiding these 10 salary mistakes. You think you're being offered too low, how to negotiate that. Responding to requests for salary requirements. This is probably something we ought to take up right now, because early in an interview process, even in a first interview, an employer may ask you, what are your expectations? And so I surely encourage you to do your homework on typical salaries for your particular field. And actually, further down this list is a whole bunch of resources to do that. And one of the links further on another slide is where do we maintain resources, where you can do the kind of market analysis that might put you in a good position. That's really important, because if the employer says, what kind of salary are you looking for? Thanks for coming. It's part of their measure. Do you have a realistic sense of the field? They may not react as favorably if you sit there and say, well, I'm really more interested in the job, and I'm sure you'll reward me accordingly. Not that. That's not as good as, well, I've done some homework on this, and by my best estimation, I'm looking for X to Y, a range, which you've found it, best as you can in the market information. Now, again, one of the links later on takes you to a variety of resources, some of which are aimed at college market kinds of things. So you've got to do your homework. At that stage of a process, if somebody says, well, what kind of salary are you looking at? Don't ever name a single figure. Don't ever do it. Do your homework and say, well, I've done some homework, blah, 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 and from what the range might be from here to there. I think there might be some variables, but I'd be happy to discuss that further. And then you say, what kind of range are you working with? Now, one of you asked, what if they don't tell you? Well, if they don't tell you, I guess you're not going to have that amount of that clarity right away. And your question about,
Well, in a lot of applications now, I don't know, I'm assuming they're pre-screening because you have to use they're like multiple choice buttons, right? And there's no negotiable, or you have no idea what the other benefits package comes, vacation, holidays, healthcare. But they're forcing you into what I consider very small ranges to choose from. So it makes you nervous that you want to hit roughly, you have an idea in your mind where you want to be, but you don't want to overprice or underprice yourself out of that job.
Right, right. Yeah.
But in giving the salary range, do we only think about basic salary, or is that like overall with
Good question.
benefits?
Generally speaking, if you go out and use some of the salary research resources that are here and on our website, you'll get general ideas on salaries, base salaries. In some cases, organizations try, or there's some information about those extra dimensions of a compensation package. What we're talking is broader, and what those elements might be, and whether you should include those elements. If you have been employed and you're moving from one situation to another, you should be looking at your own past package in those terms, not just what was your salary, but for instance, if you had to pay health insurance out of your own pocket, you didn't, but what would it be if you did? And other kinds of things that carry a cost, you might try to calculate that sort of thing so that you would say, well, I'm aware that it might be here to here, but I know there are dimensions that relate to benefits and things which might alter that. I'm sure, but you don't want to get too deep into it. You want to allude that you're aware, but you probably want to say, I know we could probably discuss those things at a later time. Which is basically, if they ask you at the front end of a process, what are you looking for? The question he raises is, of course, you do this without talking to a person. You're on an application and you have to click a button. Yeah, your homework will help you at that point, but yeah, you're probably wise to be a little anxious about it. But eventually it'll be under discussion. And I know in one of the articles, there's something about, you know, do you accept the low end of a salary or something, just to make it to the next step of an interview process. I don't think that's a good thing to do. As you said, you don't want to position yourself too low. It's not that the employer eventually is out to, you know, underpay you, but within some ranges, if the range they have to work with is, I'm going to use round numbers, you know, $60,000 to $70,000, and they make you, you know, you say I want 60, and they make you an offer of 65. Heck, that sounds like a great deal to you. Only you never knew they could go to 70. And so they look like, whoever negotiates it with you, you know, looks like a hero to the actual manager out of whose budget this money comes. So, and it depends on who you end up negotiating with too, and that's a question for the execution part of this. But suffice it to say that there's a whole bunch of stuff in these articles that might help you take on some of these things. The other collection is subtly different. It does repeat a couple of things, but it also draws on some specific resources. I actually brought with me a book called Negotiating Your Salary, How to Make $1,000 a Minute. By that they mean, how can you up your offer with a few minutes of conversation? Kind of thing. It doesn't mean you're literally going to make $1,000 a minute. That sounds like a lottery prize, doesn't it? The author is one Jack Chapman, and he's actually one of the people who has an article that they were allowed to reproduce. Now, if you go to Jack Chapman on the web, he'll tell you a little and sell you the rest, kind of thing. You know, and he's out to sell books. But in any case, there's a lot of good articles which I would really commend to your inspection. So, are there any questions at this point? Okay. Preparing for negotiation. I said we'd go into this. Well, this link will take you to some resources on our website. We belong to a national association of colleges and employers. It's career services people and recruiters. And they survey graduating students, both at the bachelor's level as well as the master's and PhD levels. They compile information and they make it available through a calculator. So you could go in and build this link and go in and figure out what somebody like you, either by curriculum or by professional focus, might command in the market. And that's what you're trying to do. The other resources here are general ones, the Occupational Outlook Handbook. The U.S. government has a thing called Career One Stop, which has some things. JobStar is an interesting one. It's based on the West Coast, but it actually has a section whereby you can examine, I think they estimate 300 different kinds of salary surveys that may have been commissioned by various organizations. And usually when there are salary surveys, there's two entities who do it. The government does it because they're interested in knowing the economy and that sort of thing. I suppose it's three. Colleges do it. But the other people who do it are professional associations. So if you're in the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, you wonder what your peers are making to make sure you're up to speed. I mean, our professional association publishes every year information for, what an associate director at a career center at an institution of 20,000 students ought to be making, because it's national data. So if I'm antsy about this sort of thing, I can go in and see if I'm being paid what above average, below average, that sort of thing. But anyway, there's a variety of things in JobStar. Salary.com is a fairly well-known one where you can go in and for free they'll give you a profile. It does allow for some targeting in terms of geographic location. To use my own background as an example, if I took the salary that I earn here in Syracuse and asked for a translation of what I would need to earn in New York City to have the same kind of buying power, that is what salary is, yikes. There's no way I'm going to achieve that if I move. So in some cases, if the offer you're made in one setting, if you move to a different level of cost of living, it may not be equitable. And this is something you might need to know. Actually, down here is a really interesting one. It's called Paycheck City. Well, Paycheck City actually offers calculators whereby if you're going to move from a state, for instance, that has an income tax to a state that doesn't have an income tax, and there are some out there still, that could be more in your take-home pay. Now, whether that will be enough for you to decide to take a job in Oklahoma or wherever one of those states may be, that might be a variable that you take into account. So, check out Paycheck City. The other one that's interesting that people are increasingly used is something called Glassdoor. How many of you are already familiar with Glassdoor? Some of you are. You should become familiar with it because they purport to identify salary figures for specific kinds of positions in specific organizations. And they do this by a variety of networking and information gathering and that sort of thing. And so in the terms of the research that you're doing, that might be a resource that you might depend on. We're looking into now an arrangement with Glassdoor whereby we, being career services, if we can afford to, might be able to pay an annual fee to open up a portal so that you could go use those resources without you having to pay for it. Because otherwise these groups are always about, or some of them at least, are all about giving you a little and selling you the rest, that sort of thing. But a collection of great resources in terms of researching salary. This leaps and bounds over decades ago when salaries were very secret. Nowadays, they're out there. They're out there. You can find it with some detective work. So, let's see. I think there's in terms of other preparation, this is good. I hope you'll find this interesting. You do have to know your own field. And so if you were to go into a resource called ONET, I use this as, I just pulled up an example. Here's an example of a general description for somebody who might be an information security analyst. Some of our folks from the iSchool, maybe other areas may do this. It's just an example. Here's a nice description of what people actually do and what kinds of skills and abilities and work habits and what makes for somebody who's a good fit for this, generally speaking. Well, you ought to pay attention to this because you're asking yourself, am I that person? And so you might identify your own strengths and things. It does include information on education and somewhere wages and employment and that sort of thing. Good generic kind of information. And it deals with a variety of kinds of roles. So this is a good example of something. You might actually look at specific job announcements. One would hope that you're looking at the market, wherever you can find them. How many of you are familiar with a tool called Indeed? Or Simply Hired or Hound? Some of you are. These are technologies really that allow you to ask the technology to go find you jobs. And you specify what they are. And so indeed, yes, they may be used to identify things you might apply for. But from the standpoint of researching salaries, it's a matter of going and looking at real announcements. So if we went to the advanced search part of Indeed, and let's say we go into, with these words in the title, information security, and maybe we look in New York City.
Information.
Did I spell it wrong?
Yeah.
That won't get us anything, will it?
Yeah.
Thank you for catching that. Okay, I did this earlier. Find jobs. So up will come jobs that relate to that title. And so if you went into a position, information security analyst, up will come a description. It might or might not include salary information, but it will also deepen your sense of the skills and talents and things that an employer might value. I don't mean to delay our conversation about how you're really going to initiate, because this is so important. If you have a sense ahead of time of what employers look for, and you've assessed your own background, then you have a confidence. You know the product you have has the right features that they're likely to want to buy. And the more features you have, the higher your leverage in terms of salary or negotiation. So I show you this just to make sure that you can see generic stuff versus specific stuff. This, I don't mean to set you, I hope this is important to you, that you might engage in this, because it's so important. It's your future. So that's Indeed. Let's see. Employer research, just to give you a quick look. This is a set of databases that the SU libraries maintain that will help you both identify companies as well as investigate them further. So again, if you want to project that you are particularly informed and a great candidate by way of interest and informative, this would be something you would do. You could perhaps do it at the very first application stage. You certainly should do this at the interview stage, because the more you can project value, the more you're likely to be able to negotiate. Part of what I'm going to say in a few minutes, a little advance notice, is you've got to pay attention to this during interviewing. So, enough said here. These resources are easily accessed. Employer research, readings on negotiating, disability accommodation, evaluating a job. These will take you to, a couple of them are links to our website. The disability disclosure and accommodation link goes to a part of the U.S. Department of Labor, and it talks about what's it all about, why do you do it, when do you do it, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to beat this to death, but if this affects you or you know someone it might, please alert them to these links. Anyway, let's evaluating. All right, using interview questions purposefully. You're out to determine what they really value. And so you should derive questions for interviews from the very get-go, and certainly in subsequent, if you're in a multi-interview process, which most of you probably will be. What kinds of questions are you going to ask about the responsibilities of a position, what the priorities of a position are, what does the employer feel are the principal or high priority skills and backgrounds that they favor. This could be things like academic background. I was working yesterday with a student for a mock interview with a consulting position with Deloitte. I looked at the position announcement. There had to be 6 or 7 academic backgrounds that Deloitte might consider people from. At no point did it say, this is the one we prefer most, this is the second and third place degrees, this is the, they don't do that. So you might be curious, if you've been invited to interview with Deloitte, you have a degree in IST, or you have a degree in mathematics or something, you might wonder, has this kind of a degree been a real advantage for someone in the past? Will that be part of my peer group, someone who has a background similar to mine? This gives you some insight into fit factors. But this is what you ask. Because if you learn that they've really had good luck from people from these kinds of programs, and you're it, no, you may have leverage. Another example of an interview question that might lead you to build a foundation. Let's suppose they simply invite you to talk about something. You're sitting there with they're sitting with your resume, and they say to you, "Oh, so tell me about this job." They simply invite you to talk. Well, your treatment of that kind of an invitation should be this. You should have prepared for them a sense of what you did, kind of a summary of what you did, and you should be thinking ahead of time, what elements of my experience might help me to perform this new job. Is it the tasks I handled? Is it the environment in which I worked? What is the relatedness? And so you ought to probably say, well, let me give you an overview of what I did there, and I've tried to think of ways that it might help, that experience might help me in your situation. Let me share those with you, and you can tell me whether I'm on track. That's perfectly okay. Most employers will go with that, and so you go into it. But you're doing it very calculatedly, because once you say, have you found other hires that have had backgrounds like this? She's smiling. She knows the game here.
Yeah, they did ask me that like this summer in an interview.
Mm-hmm. Open-ended invitation to talk.
Yeah. He's like, I'll give you a minute to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, how has your like previous sales experience been, and like how do you want to move forward?
Right. And so it could be work habits, it could be distinct experiences, all kinds of things could be related. And on the surface, they might not seem so related to you. But you have to kind of get into the head of the employer, and the more you understand about the jobs, the more you'll realize that this element of this job was important and might be important here, and then you kind of explore that. You know, I remember having a sales job one time, you know, where I sold a product with features. I mean, let's take this work station here. You know, it might have all kinds of capabilities. You know, maybe it has Movie Maker on it. Okay? Well, Movie Maker is really cool. You can do this, you can do that, you can do this, you can do that. But if you don't need it, and I spend time talking about it without learning what your need is, I'm wasting my time, because you don't need it. And so when it comes to ultimately pitching for a job offer, you've got to base your pitch on the things you've been able to learn about which features of your product seem to be good connections, and has the employer actually validated them. So this is what I mean by using interview questions purposefully. If all you do is give information, what did you do at company A? This is what I did. And that's all you do, and they move on and say, so what did you do at company B?
Right. So
You've missed a
I was
chance.
a sales manager before, and I was an assistant manager before, you know, so.
And these are the kinds of things I actually did, and I see a strong parallel between that and this. Do you see it? 'Cause that's the validation. If somebody will do it. I seldom, in mock interviews, real interviews, I seldom see anybody do this. And I've talked to employers, it's perfectly okay. Because your job in an interview is to connect. Sometimes you have to do it with a little more assertiveness instead of passivity. So, using interview questions purposely, planning and rehearsal. You've got to think about this. This is why you don't start negotiating the minute you hear an offer. And so you talk it out with people who have some experience with this, notably us. By the way, should you graduate and then get offers, we are just as committed to helping alumni as we are to helping current students. So this is something you can take up with us. We're open year-round. Now, let's get on to what you were really hoping to get. Preparation resources. Networking is a great resource. Finding out things from people about what organizations value. I mentioned earlier, maybe somebody whom you meet through LinkedIn or something can tell you whether company A shows an inclination to negotiate, that sort of thing. But how are you actually going to do it? Here's the real core of this, I think, for some people. Once you have, I said this already, once an offer is made, you want to declare that you'll give it serious consideration. So whether it's made to you orally or over the phone, two-way communication, fine. You should evidence interest, and you should declare that you'll give it serious consideration. Now, they may or may not tell you when they want your answer, and you should ask about that. And that doesn't lock you into a time frame, because that might be a negotiable. Can you get a little more time to think about it? But make sure you know who you're supposed to approach if you do have questions. And I would put it that way. I'd say, whom should I contact if I do have questions? Don't say, whom should I contact if I want to negotiate? That's really not good. So, but make sure you know the person. Try for face-to-face. Because face-to-face, you can score points with your sincerity and everything else. I don't know about Skype. We had a colleague in our office who moved from Syracuse to Stanford University and never set foot at Stanford until she had the job. She did it all by Skype. Now Skype adds those dimensions of delays and other kinds of things that make it, it's at least face-to-face and voice-to-voice. Phone is okay. I would try not to if you can get around it. I wouldn't want somebody to say, well, send me an email with your questions and I'll see what I can get. If you have to, you have to. It's not the preferred way to gather information and present information, perhaps, based on what? Your research into the market and your own interviewing experience that, that illuminates what you have that they really said they valued, that sort of thing. But face-to-face, when you begin a conversation, reinforce the positives. This isn't a confrontation. This isn't a, you're both trying to get to a mutually beneficial end. So I've seen it portrayed as, the employer's here and you're over there. Come around and sit with them on the same side. That's kind of a imaginary kind of thing, but that captures what it is from the outset. It's a discussion. It's not an adversarial kind of situation. Reinforce the positives. I want to thank you for this offer. It really sounds great. So far, everything I've seen about the company is great. You've shown me the work environment. I like the spaces I'd be occupying, and thanks for letting me have lunch with the people I'd be working with, because it really sounds great. I see their backgrounds. I see how much they like it. That sounds like a great place for me to work. Blah, 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 positive, positive, positive. I did have a question, though, relating to the salary. Can you help me understand how the figure came to be fixed? That's kind of a low confrontation kind of way to go about it. My personal preference is that that's the way you do it, because it won't come off as confrontational or adversarial or argumentative or anything like that. You don't want that. Now, you will read, if you go through some of these articles, you'll read people that say you should be more aggressive. if your homework tells you that, the offer is, or the range is possibly, 60 to 75, and they've offered you 66, there are those who would suggest that you get back and say, everything looks good, but I'm not taking this offer for any number that doesn't start with 7. Now that's kind of confrontational. But there would be those who would suggest you should do that. I'm not one of them. But you can think about it. And think about talking about it to somebody before it actually happens to you. There is actually in that collection, how to compose a counteroffer to the employer. I don't know that you should doubt, you should read about it, but I don't know that you should offer what's basically termed a counteroffer, because it risks them interpreting that the first offer is now off the table, and you're proposing a new offer. And if they turn it down, then there's no offer to be considered. Jack Chapman's book talks about, and some of the articles talk about, things like who should discuss salary first. His point is you don't. You only discuss salary if it's brought up by the employer. And again, it could be brought up early on. You don't, this is, think of a sales situation. You don't go through a conversation about the job and your own background, blah, 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 and before they have a chance to offer you, you say, well, let me propose a job offer then. I understand the job and I understand the work environment, and I'd take this job if you offered me X. You shouldn't do that. They should talk first. Give you an offer, set a number. Then you can go back to your research or go back to your needs, etc., and ask questions. So that's really important. Be ready. Everything I've said up to now about being ready and doing your homework, this is where it comes into focus. And if you're well armed with this stuff, and you can go and have the resources at your disposal, you're going to talk to somebody, bring your laptop or print the stuff out, support what you think your position is, that's fine, because they want you, remember. And they'll engage you if you appear to approach this in a rational, kind of even-tempered kind of way. If you come in and rant, not going to work. Get offers in writing. If you get changes, get them in writing. Now, any employer worth their opportunity should be willing to do this. They'll give you that. It may take some time. Maybe they go back. Depends on who you're working with. If you're working with an HR person, the HR person is going to have to go back and talk to the manager, who really probably has made the hiring decision or the offer decision. That has to be worked out, because if it's a money issue, it's his or her budget. So it depends on who you're negotiating with. If you're directing, if you're working with a small company and you're working with the president of the company or the chief financial officer, there's nobody else. They're your person, kind of thing. But get your changes in writing. Please be ethical through this process. Do your homework, represent yourself honestly. Do not claim, here's an example, do not claim to have other offers if you do not. Now that is one of the leverage points. Do you have other offers simultaneously? And certainly that is one of the techniques from which you could bargain. Hey, somebody else wants me too. And that might mean a certain kind of approach, but that could be one of those things where if indeed you prefer company A, but they haven't offered you as much as company B, you need to get back to company A and say so. I've been lucky to get an offer from another organization. It's very similar work, but I like the sounds of your work environment. I like the sounds of the growth potential of this. We get into here, what is a good job? Is it just money, or is it growth potential? Is it exposure to solid peers and solid management? Is it good things that you've been able to research about the organization and learn about firsthand? What makes for a good job? It's more than just money. So, you have to be honest. You don't want to leverage anything. But it's okay to go in, as we said earlier, and bridge the idea of negotiation, even if you don't have anything else in the pipeline. because they're not going to rescind the offer. They want you, and they'll talk. If they can't meet that, then okay, there's still an offer on the table, and you can decide what to do next. It might be, you know, things like performance review negotiation or things like that. So, how'd I do? Oh, good. Don't be reluctant. Be professional and positive. Do your homework. Questions? Have I covered what you said you came to learn? I'm not looking for kudos here or anything. But is there anything that you brought up earlier that I've forgotten that we didn't address? Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that we're done. So again, echoing what? Okay, what?
Question about the slides. When will they be available?
As soon as we process yours having swiped in. So if anyone came in late and did not swipe in and can do so, please do so, because that will form our distribution list. So that should probably happen by early next week.
So probably next week.
Yeah.
Do you need it sooner?
No.
All right, good. That's takes a couple days.
Otherwise, pick up the materials that Elena alluded to earlier. Yes?
I did have one more question about etiquette. Is it appropriate to bring a laptop or iPad to keep track of notes and things like that?
In a negotiating session or in an interview or both?
Yeah, in both. In both.
Whether you should kind of take notes in an interview might be something that you might ask about.
Okay.
At the beginning of an interview, there's usually small talk, and at that point you could say, and the best way to bridge whether you can take notes is to say, I've come with a lot of questions, and I'm curious when you wanted me to introduce those questions. Because if there's only 3 answers, hold your questions to the end, which is the traditional model. They could say, ask your questions as you have them. Or particularly if you come into a rather vague situation, ask them right now. This could be your technique to try to be able to ask some questions before you have to talk about the features of the product. This is what you should ask yourself ahead of time. Do I know enough to reasonably explain where the matches are between my background? But if they say, well, hold your questions to the end, which is fairly predictable, you could say, well then, do you mind if I take a note here or there on the chance that I want to come back to something? That's probably the reason you do it. Is because at the questioning stage, I hope you come into interviews with questions all oriented. But you do want to pay attention to things that come up in the interview. And you might want to make a mental note. If somebody says, well, how do you handle pressure? And you give them an example, but you don't kind of have permission to say, well, what kinds of pressures do people in this position usually encounter? Which would be unnatural. Maybe you have to think of that, so you make a note, however you make it, pressure. That way, when they turn over control for you to ask questions, you can say, well, let me see where I want to start. Well, let me start. A couple of minutes ago, you asked me about pressure situations. I'm curious, typically speaking, what kinds of pressures do people encounter? That could be a reason you've taken a note. Otherwise, you should take notes after interviews, because you drove some of it with your own questions, and you want to write it down, because of course your interview isn't over until you send them a thank you letter, which ideally should say thank you, but should also reintroduce your background. There are certain elements. If you've asked them what are the most important parts of this job, what are the greatest expectations in the first 60 days, this is what you put in your follow-up.
I have questions about like some benefits that may intersect if you're married, for example. For example, health insurance
Right.
and 401k. What if they ask you, do you have health insurance? So right now, I'm under a family plan with my husband. So what do I answer to that? Do I say I don't need it?
Yeah, and I wish I was the benefits expert to give that answer to you.
Okay.
That could be the kind of thing where you might want to try to consult with someone else, and we might be able to identify someone who would field a question like that and have more authoritative background to address. So, once again, I invite you to follow up this with a lot of reading. Again, remember what this is. This is you competing with others for job offers. An employer has an idea of who the ideal candidate. The ideal candidate does their homework. So if you don't do your homework, you could suffer some disadvantage. Yes?
I have some suggestion. When you will send this presentation, please don't send in PDF format because all these links will be lost. So if you plan to send the presentation in the original format.
Yeah, that is our intention. And yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, because I actually did a series of PowerPoint-driven presentations recently, and I reminded the professor when he put these on the class site to encourage the students to look at it in this mode, the actual slideshow mode versus the slides particularly, because the links don't work in the slide-by-slide kind of thing, but they will work in the presentation mode. So that simply makes it easier for you. Thank you for that. Well, let me wish you good luck. Yes?
What's the range of salary that when they ask you? Like, you gave, I think, like 15,000. What would you recommend?
Oh, what kind of a range would I go? That's really kind of driven by your research. But it's not unusual that people range things $10,000 instead of $3,000.
Yeah.
That's too narrow.
Pretty big.
Yeah. And I certainly, good question, because this prompts me to say, I wouldn't negotiate for another $1,000. This is not worth it. Now, yeah, there would be some people that said, well, with another $1,000, you can go out to dinner more than once. Yeah, I suppose that's true, but you really don't want to project, remember, that you're just in this for the money. Employer wants to pay you a fair compensation for the value you deliver to them. That's your point, should be your point of view. So a few $1,000s isn't worth quibbling over. Although, if you ask about performance review and what are the implications of that, that could be something that you might come in and meet with us, even maybe in a drop-in. We meet students in drop-ins 4 days a week, which are unscheduled kind of quick meetings. We also do appointment length things, which are real hard to get because we're swamped with requests, but that could be something that you bring up, even if you don't have an offer. Just build the foundation and let us help you in your individual circumstances. Right, well, thanks for your participation, and I hope you benefit, and good luck.